They began the war with a technological advantage that few in the world understood: a silent edge hidden behind concrete bunkers, rotating antennas, and meticulously trained radio operators. In 1939 and 1940, long before most nations grasped the strategic value of radar, Germany had already built the most advanced air defense network on Earth. Freya sets, operating around 125 megahertz, scanned the horizons with ranges exceeding 100 kilometers. Würzburg dishes, compact and precise, locked onto targets with meter-level accuracy. These systems, integrated into the sprawling Kammhuber line, formed a defensive web that allowed the Luftwaffe to detect, track, and intercept British bombers with deadly efficiency. For a brief window early in the war, Germany saw further, reacted faster, and controlled the night sky with a sophistication unmatched by any other power. And that advantage shaped Hitler's confidence. Radar was the backbone of his promise that the Reich would never experience what London endured during the Blitz. Under General Josef Kammhuber, the Luftnachrichtenservice organized the Himmelbit zones, narrow corridors of overlapping radar coverage paired with searchlights, sound locators, and night fighter bases. Each zone operated like a trap. Freya detected incoming bombers, Würzburg refined their positions, and controllers vectored Bf-110s or Ju-88s directly into interception paths. It was a system designed for precision, for control, for exact timing. Early RAF night raids stumbled helplessly into it. Bomber crews reported overwhelming accuracy in German tracking. Some missions suffered losses so severe that the RAF questioned whether night bombing could remain viable. Britain, despite its scientific prowess, simply did not yet possess a radar network to match the German system. It seemed at first that the Luftwaffe had discovered the formula for perfect air defense. But this early advantage concealed deep flaws that would eventually doom the Reich. First, Germany's radar technology, though advanced, was tied to meter wave frequencies that worked brilliantly for early detection but were fundamentally limited in resolution and resilience. Second, the Kammhuber line depended on strict control, rigid defensive boxes that could handle predictable bomber streams but struggled when raids grew larger, faster, or more varied. Third, and most fatal, Germany assumed that its radar supremacy would remain unchallenged. That assumption proved disastrous. The Allies, driven by necessity and immense research investment, were already exploring a radically different approach to radar, the cavity magnetron, and the birth of true microwave radar. Meanwhile, Germany's ability to innovate was hampered by bureaucratic infighting, overconfidence, and a scientific establishment that dismissed microwaves as impractical for wartime use. But in 1940 and 1941, these dangers were still distant shadows. In the present, Germany's radar network was performing exactly as designed. British bombers struggled to find their targets. Night fighters, guided with precision, tore through bomber streams. Each success strengthened the illusion that the Reich had solved the problem of aerial defense permanently. In Berlin's war rooms, the message was simple: the British could bomb, but they could not break through. In truth, however, the Luftwaffe had built a system optimized for the early war, a system brittle against the innovations that Allied scientists were already preparing. Germany had radar superiority, but it was a temporary superiority, built on technologies that were already beginning to age. The British had no intention of fighting the radar war on German terms. They were about to leap 2 generations ahead, and when they did, Germany's network, so carefully constructed, so deeply trusted, would begin to unravel. But in these early years, no one in the Reich could imagine that their proudest technological achievement would soon become obsolete. The Kammhuber line seemed unbreakable, Freya and Würzburg seemed unanswerable, and Germany's radar war seemed won before it had truly begun. Germany lost the radar war not because its early systems were weak. They were, in fact, brilliant for their time, but because the Allies leapt into an entirely different technological universe. While the Reich continued improving meter wave radar in incremental steps, British and American scientists reinvented the field overnight with the most important electromagnetic weapon of the war, the cavity magnetron. This device, perfected in 1940 at the University of Birmingham, generated powerful microwave beams at wavelengths around 10 centimeters, orders of magnitude shorter than those used by Freya or Würzburg. The implications were enormous. Shorter wavelengths meant sharper imaging, smaller antennas, and dramatically improved ground mapping capability. They also meant something Germany could not have foreseen. Microwave radar was effectively invisible to the Reich's entire detection network. Freya and Würzburg, operating at meter waves, could not even detect the emissions of Allied 10-centimeter sets. A bomber carrying H-2S or H-2X appeared as nothing more than background noise. The Luftwaffe was staring into the sky with the wrong tools. The British understood the significance immediately. In early 1943, They equipped Pathfinder units with H-2S, the world's first airborne ground mapping radar, enabling crews to locate cities, rivers, and industrial districts even through cloud and darkness. What had once required moonlight, celestial navigation, or sheer luck could now be performed by glancing at a glowing radar screen. British bombers no longer wandered off course or scattered in weather. The night sky had become navigable. Germany, unaware at first, struggled to understand why RAF accuracy was suddenly improving. Even worse for the Reich, H-2S transformed how Bomber Command organized its raids. The Kammhuber line had been built to channel bombers into predictable streams that could be intercepted by night fighters. But H-2S-enabled aircraft now approached targets from multiple directions, changed headings without warning, and executed large-scale maneuvers that the Himmelbett system simply could not track. Then the Americans joined the fight with an even more advanced system, H-2X, known as Mickey. Using a 10-centimeter magnetron and a rotating dish antenna, H-2X could outline entire cities with extraordinary clarity. Even if clouds shrouded the Reich for weeks, American bombers could strike oil plants, marshalling yards, and industrial zones with unprecedented reliability. Germany's radar operators found their scopes overloaded, ghosted, or blank during raids they were supposed to control. But navigation and targeting were only the beginning. Microwave radar also revolutionized Allied air defense and ground coordination. The U.S. Army deployed SCR-584, a mobile 10-centimeter tracking radar so accurate that it could guide anti-aircraft shells directly into the path of V-1 rockets. No German radar ever achieved comparable precision. In air combat, microwave sets allowed Allied fighters to hunt at night, track enemy aircraft in clouds, and vector interceptors with remarkable accuracy. Germany, by contrast, was trapped inside its own technological paradigm. The Reich's Luftfahrtministerium had dismissed microwave research as unnecessary in 1939. By 1942, German scientists knew the Allies possessed magnetron-based systems. Wreckage from a downed Sterling bomber even provided physical proof, but they could not replicate the technology. German industry lacked the materials and precision manufacturing required. Bureaucratic infighting crippled development. Some engineers insisted meter waves were good enough. Others argued for half-meter improvements. No one could build a magnetron that matched even the earliest British designs. Thus, when the Allies fielded H-2S, H-2X, and SCR-584, the technological gap was not one generation but two, and every month the gap widened. The Luftwaffe's early war advantage had evaporated. German controllers who once guided night fighters with confidence now faced skies filled with microwave-equipped bombers immune to their detection systems. H-2S showed the bombers where Germany's cities were. H-2X showed them where the targets were inside those cities. And German radar showed nothing at all. The Reich had entered the war ahead in radar technology. By 1943, it was hopelessly behind, and the Allies were just beginning to exploit that advantage. Germany had spent the early war years crafting an air defense system built on precision, timing, and the assumption that the radar picture would always be clear. But beginning in mid-1943, that picture shattered. The Allies did not simply out-innovate German radar, they blinded it, deceived it, and overloaded it with a sudden avalanche of electronic warfare techniques that the Reich never recovered from. The crisis began on the night of July 24-25, 1943, during Operation Gomorrah, the RAF's opening blow against Hamburg. British bombers dropped bundles of aluminum foil strips known as window, in the U.S. chaff. These strips, falling slowly through the air, reflected radar waves with nearly the same strength as aircraft. To Würzburg and Freya, entire clouds of fake targets appeared, multiplied, scattered, and drifted unpredictably. The Himmelbett system, designed around careful vectoring of a few night fighters against a few bomber streams, now faced thousands of radar echoes. German operators could not distinguish plane from chaff. Intercepts collapsed. Night fighters searched an empty sky, while bombers flew past unchallenged. Hamburg burned, and the German radar war, though no one could admit it yet, had already been lost. The Luftwaffe's response was frantic but futile. Würzburg sets attempted to filter out the clutter, but window overwhelmed them. Phone lines buzzed with urgent orders to modify equipment, adjust signal processing, or establish visual confirmation procedures, but none of it addressed the fundamental problem. Germany had invested heavily in a radar architecture vulnerable to chaff, and the Allies had just turned that vulnerability into a weapon of strategic destruction. Then came Mandrel, the next blow. Mandrel was a noise jammer specifically designed to disrupt Freya, the backbone of Germany's early warning system.
Mounted on RAF bombers and escort aircraft, Mandrel transmitted powerful interference on the same frequency as Freya, washing German radar screens in static. Himmelbett zones that once tracked bombers at 100 kilometers now lost contact entirely. The early warning chain that Kammhuber had spent years refining dissolved into blind spots stretching across northern France, Belgium, and western Germany. German commanders no longer knew where RAF bomber streams were approaching from, or how large they were, or when they would arrive over target cities. The night sky had turned opaque. In 1944, Germany suffered an additional electronic disaster. The Allies introduced Carpet, a close-range jammer that targeted Würzburg radar sets. Carpet emitted powerful modulated microwave noise that confused Würzburg's precise tracking beams. Operators attempting to lock onto a bomber found their scopes filled with oscillating artifacts, false blips, and drifting targets that collapsed the moment they attempted firing solutions. The combination of Window, Mandrel, and Carpet meant that the Luftwaffe's radar operators now faced a nightmare scenario. Their early warning radars could not see, their tracking radars could not guide, and their night fighter controllers could not vector interceptors with any confidence at all. The Kammhuber line, once the pride of German air defense, was now little more than a series of disconnected, often blinded posts surrounded by illusions and noise. And the Allies were not done. They introduced Corona and Prefectos, radio deception operations that impersonated German controllers. Skilled RAF German speakers transmitted false commands during night battles, redirecting German fighters away from bomber streams or ordering them to land. Pilots, unable to verify the authenticity of the voices on their radios, obeyed orders that undermined their own defense. Some circled aimlessly, others returned to base. A few were sent directly into kill zones. German frustration soared. Internal reports described the electronic environment as chaotic, unreliable, and catastrophic to coordinated interception. The Luftwaffe tried to adapt. They attempted rapid frequency hopping. They installed new filtering circuits. They looked for alternative wavelengths. They even deployed Naxos, a crude detector for Allied H-2S radar. But every German counter had two fatal flaws. First, it arrived too late. Second, it was technically inferior to the Allied systems it attempted to defeat. Naxos could detect H-2S emissions only if the bomber was within dangerously close range, and by then it was too late for a successful interception. Meanwhile, the RAF and USAF advanced their own radar sets at a pace Germany could not match. The technological gap widened with every month. Germany had entered the radar war with early supremacy. By 1943, the radar picture that once empowered its night fighter force had been drowned in static, illusions, and false commands. Its defenders were fighting blind, its interceptors were fighting deaf, and its radar scientists were fighting a two-front war against physics and time, both of which they were losing.
By late 1943, the system that Germany had once believed impenetrable, the Kammhuber line, the pride of the Luftwaffe's night fighting arm, was collapsing under the weight of Allied innovation. What had begun as a network of meticulously coordinated radar boxes, searchlights, and night fighter teams was now an obsolete architecture, unable to function in the blinding fog of electronic warfare. The line did not break all at once. It disintegrated piece by piece, raid by raid, until nothing remained of the precision machine that had defined early German air defense. At its core, the Himmelbett system depended on a simple principle: perfect information. Freya detected a bomber stream's approach. Würzburg refined the track. Controllers vectored a night fighter into an interception corridor. The fighter closed in using visual cues or airborne radar. But by 1943, every link in this chain was compromised. Mandrel and Window blinded the early warning radars. Carpet jammed the precision tracking radars. Corona and Perfecto sabotaged radio control. And H-2S-equipped bombers no longer followed predictable flight paths. The Himmelbett model, structured, rigid, dependent on uninterrupted radar coverage, simply could not operate in this environment. German night fighter aces such as Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer and Helmut Lent still scored victories, but they were fighting an increasingly impossible battle, surrounded by chaos their ground controllers could no longer decipher. The Luftwaffe attempted to adjust by scaling up to the Zahme Sau, tame boar, and Wilde Sau, wild boar tactics, which were far looser, less reliant on radar boxes, and more dependent on radar-equipped night fighters roaming freely. But these changes were born of desperation. Wilde Sau in particular, sending single-seat day fighters like the Bf-109 and FW-190 to attack bombers illuminated by fires or flares, produced temporary success but unsustainable losses. Navigating at night without sophisticated instruments led to crashes. Many pilots died without ever meeting a bomber. Meanwhile, the Allies continued escalating their radar advantage. British scientists cracked the operating frequencies of the Liechtenstein BC airborne radar carried by German night fighters.
Once they understood them, they deployed jamming systems that rendered those radars useless. Germany responded with SN2, a longer wavelength radar intended to be more resistant to jamming. For a short space of months, SN2 restored some measure of night fighting capability. But then the Allies captured an intact SN2-equipped Ju-88 that landed in England by mistake. Within weeks, SN2 frequencies were jammed as effectively as the earlier sets. Every technological step Germany managed to take was instantly countered. Allied intelligence and electronic warfare teams were simply faster, better funded, and operating with more scientific manpower. The Luftwaffe, once a pioneer in radar, had become a follower, and a slow one. The structural weaknesses of the Kammhuber line now became fatal. Its rigid zones could not adapt. Its radar-dependent command cycle was too slow. Its controllers could not sift through the noise and illusions created by Allied jammers. German reports describe seas of phantom targets and total loss of situational clarity. Bomber streams often passed through the line with minimal interception. The once feared night defense belt that stretched from Denmark to France and into the Low Countries became a ghost of itself. Meanwhile, RAF Bomber Command shifted to massive multi-axis attacks. Instead of a predictable bomber stream entering the Himmelbett zone sequentially, entire waves of bombers arrived simultaneously from several directions. The system's narrow tracking capacity collapsed instantly. No radar operator could manage dozens of disrupted tracks. No controller could vector fighters effectively when radar screens were filled with garbage returns. And the night fighters themselves were increasingly flying blind. German airborne radars, though improved, were still decades behind American and British microwave units. British AI Mark 8 and American SCR 720 radars could detect German fighters long before the Germans saw them, allowing mosquitoes to turn from prey into hunters. Losses mounted. The Luftwaffe's night fighter force, NJF-1, NJF-2, NJF-5, NJF-6, led to death slowly but steadily in the face of an enemy they could no longer see or predict. By early 1944, the Kammhuber line existed only on paper. Its defensive boxes were overwhelmed. Its radar picture was compromised beyond recognition. Its night fighter arm was exhausted and losing aircraft and crews faster than replacements could arrive. Germany had entered the night war with the best radar network in the world. It now possessed a broken shell of that system, crippled by jamming, outpaced by microwave technology, and unable to defend the Reich from the nightly destruction inflicted by Allied bombers. The radar war was no longer just a technological contest. It had become a death spiral for Germany's entire air defense apparatus. And the fall of the Kammhuber line marked the moment when Germany lost the night skies forever.
By 1944, Germany was no longer fighting to win the radar war. It was fighting to slow a collapse that had already become irreversible. The Reich still fielded brilliant scientists, dedicated engineers, and a night fighter force filled with men of extraordinary skill, but none of it mattered anymore. The Allies had leapt ahead into a new electromagnetic era built on microwave radar, advanced jamming, and real-time electronic intelligence. Germany, once a pioneer, was now technologically paralyzed, structurally overwhelmed, and industrially strangled. The radar war had become the clearest example of a truth the Reich never fully understood. Air defense is not merely a matter of equipment, but of keeping pace with an enemy who is out-innovating you every month. And by 1944, Germany could no longer keep pace at all. The heart of the problem lay in the one device Germany never mastered, the cavity magnetron. This tiny, incredibly difficult to manufacture component gave Britain and the United States a two-generation lead in radar accuracy, power output, and miniaturization. While Germany persisted with meter wave and decimeter wave technology, improving Freya and Würzburg only incrementally, the Allies were building radars that Germany could neither detect nor jam effectively. This was not due to a lack of intelligence. German engineers knew the magnetron existed as early as 1942 from captured H-2S sets. But knowing and manufacturing were different things. German industry lacked the fine-tolerance machining, heat-resistant alloys, and precision tooling needed to build high-power microwave components at scale. Even when prototypes appeared, they were fragile, underpowered, and months too late. Meanwhile, Allied production surged. H-2S units rolled off British assembly lines. H-2X units emerged from American labs with even greater accuracy. SCR 584 radar revolutionized Allied anti-aircraft defense and ground control. Germany's scientific establishment found itself chasing a moving target they could never reach. And inside the Reich, the walls were closing in. The Allied bombing campaign struck electronic factories, radar assembly plants, cable works, and transformer facilities, often with devastating precision, guided by the very microwave radars Germany could not counter.
Factories that produced radar components in cities like Hamburg, Berlin, and Dresden were either destroyed or forced to disperse into cramped, inefficient underground sites. Skilled technicians died under the bombs or were drafted into infantry units desperately guarding the collapsing Eastern Front. Even worse, the Luftwaffe is losing the human infrastructure necessary to operate its radar network. Experienced controllers, radio operators, and radar plotters, men trained for years, were increasingly killed, displaced, or transferred to fill shortages elsewhere. Radar stations that once required dozens of specialists were now manned by hastily trained replacements struggling to interpret screens flooded with jamming artifacts. The Comhuber line depended on expert interpretation, but experts were dying faster than Germany could train replacements. Meanwhile, the Allies refined every aspect of their electronic warfare systems. Window chaff became more varied, cut for different wavelengths. Mandrel expanded its jamming coverage. Carpet and Jostle disrupted not only radar but radio links. Corona imitated German controllers with eerie accuracy, spreading confusion at critical moments. RAF Mosquitoes, equipped with AI radar, hunted German night fighters with growing confidence. USAF bombers carrying H-2X led formations through storms and darkness, immune to the defenses Germany had spent years perfecting. When the Allies launched repeated attacks against Germany's oil industry in 1944, most notably the bombing of synthetic fuel plants, it was the collapse of radar-guided air defense that made those missions devastatingly effective. Without radar, Germany could not protect the refineries that powered its tanks, planes, and vehicles. Without fuel, it could not maneuver its armies or train its pilots. The radar war was not an isolated contest. It shaped every front of the conflict. In the final months of the war, the Luftwaffe existed largely on paper. Its radar network was fragmented, its night fighters overwhelmed, its cities burning nightly under raids it could no longer detect until the bombs were already falling. New German technologies appeared, Naxos, Berlin radar, improved SN2 sets, but all arrived too late, too few, and too flawed. The Reich had lost the tempo of innovation, and in electronic warfare, tempo is everything. By 1944, German radar operators were staring into blank screens, jammed scopes, and echoes that meant nothing. The once fearsome Nachtjagd flew into darkness with no guidance, no situational awareness, and no hope of turning the tide. The radar war had ended long before the guns fell silent. Germany never recovered, not because its scientists lacked brilliance, but because its enemies seized the future faster than it could comprehend. In losing the invisible war of electromagnetic waves, the Reich lost the visible war over its cities, its industry, and ultimately its survival.